Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Hello, and welcome to episode 123 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. If you are listening to this episode in real time, today is Canada's birthday, and it is also 6 months into this year for us. How far away do you feel from the ideas, the goals, the intentions that you set at the beginning of this year? Here's another question. Can making a small change to your habits and routines have a huge impact on your health, your business, and your life? And how do you cultivate good habits that improve your life and break bad habits that hold you back? James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, joins me on this episode to share more about why habits are so crucial to your success and how to create, change, and break habits. I am so excited about the timing of this episode, and I'd love to say that I planned it out. I didn't. It just happens to fall this way. So way back in episode 96 with Matt Kowald, it's not that far back really, but back at the beginning of this year, we talked to Matt about building and creating a yoga practice habit. And here we are 6 months later, where a lot of us maybe lose momentum of like that New Year's clean slate, fresh page, that momentum that goes along with it. And so I'm super excited that we have another little check-in time. So if you haven't listened to that episode with Matt Kowald, episode 96, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com/96 to have a listen. Also, this episode pairs really well with last week's episode with Amber De La Garza. Amber talked to us about how to improve our productivity, so I highly recommend going back and listening to that one as well. These three together, I want to hear what you do with this super pack of episodes. Personally, they have all made a really big impact on my business and my life. In today's episode, I'm so excited to share with you because James and I discuss everything about habits, how they're formed, why they have such a huge impact on our health and our business, and he shares his tried and tested strategies for making small changes that will really transform habits to deliver remarkable results. So maybe you've been wanting to make your own practice a habit, your yoga practice, or maybe you need help creating routines to run your business better. This episode is full of tips that you can put into practice immediately. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Shannon Crow. I'm a mother of three, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant working for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you, dear yoga teacher, because I know what it's like to feel like you're out in the jungles of yoga entrepreneurship. So this place is where you can connect to information and inspiration every single week and feel supported. We pack a lot into our show notes, and so if you're looking for extra notes and links, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com/123 for this episode. Also, I want to ask a favor. If you are loving the podcast, two things. Have you subscribed to it? And have you left us a review on iTunes? My VA was just saying to me the other day, hey, Shannon, the reviews have gone down a little bit. I don't see them popping in as much as they did. And I was like, well, that's because I stopped asking on the podcast as often. So I would love to hear from you, Connected Yoga Teachers. Tell me how the podcast is and tell me in an iTunes review. This really helps our show, and it's a great way to say thank you. And the cool thing is you can do that right from our show notes page, any show notes page. So today's is theconnectedyogateacher.com/123. And you can find that link right at the top where it says, leave a review. Corey Jean left us a review. Corey Jean is from the United States and said, this podcast really addresses issues that face so many yoga teachers. This is just what I didn't even know I needed. I'm currently enjoying binging all the past episodes. Thank you so much for your review, Corey, for taking the time to do that and for going back and listening to all of the past episodes. I would love to hear more from you. Any of you that are listening to each and every episode, reach out when you have a question or you think, hey, you haven't covered this on the podcast yet, or you covered this thing and this brought up questions for me. I love to hear from our listeners. I also love to hear from our sponsor, Schedulicity. So if you haven't heard about Schedulicity before, let me tell you, I have been using this software to schedule my yoga classes since 2011, and I absolutely love the software and the team behind it. So let's hear our hot tip of the week from Scotty.
Hi, Connected Yoga teachers. This is Scotty with Schedulicity and the hot tip of the week. When you have your business plan in place, Schedulicity can help you measure your success. Our detailed reports allow you to see exactly where your revenue is coming from and what services, classes, and promotions are the most popular. Analyzing your results will keep you on track and help you see what needs to be changed along the way.
Thank you so much, Scotty and Team Schedulicity. Already connected yoga teachers, let's dive in. So if you don't know James Clear yet, he is the author of the New York Times-bestselling book called Atomic Habits. He's the creator of the Habits Academy, an international speaker focused on habits, decision-making, and continuous improvement. James combines ideas from a wide range of disciplines, including biology, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and more, to create self-improvement tips based on proven scientific research. Yep, this is why I love this, because this is all rooted in science. On his popular website and weekly newsletter with almost 500,000 subscribers, James shares how we can create better habits, make better decisions, and live better lives. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Entrepreneur, Time, and on CBS This Morning. And right here on the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, let's not forget that. So let's dive right into this interview with James. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, James. It's great to have you here.
Hi, yeah, good to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
So when did this work start that you do with habits? Where do you feel like it all began?
Well, that's a good question. There are two ways to answer it. So the first way is just like, when did I start practicing those ideas or kind of, learning how to build habits? And of course, all humans have habits and are building them all the time. I think the first place that I kind of thought carefully about it was as an athlete. A lot of athletes will tell you that there are all kinds of habits that you're building at practice or in the gym or during your training. And so that was no different for me. I ended up playing baseball through college, and that was like an area that was very ripe for ritual and routine and kind of learning how to build habits on a daily basis. So that was maybe how I came to like the practice of building better habits and routines. But then from a scientific standpoint, like actually learning about the research and writing about it, that has been a fairly new thing in the span of my life. So the last 5 or 6 years, I've spent reading and writing and kind of investigating the research on how habits form and why they form and how we can change them and alter them. And so that work started sort of in earnest around 2012. And then I wrote about those topics for about 3 years, signed the book deal to write Atomic Habits, and then spent the last 3 years kind of writing and researching for the book and putting all that together.
Amazing. Well, thank you for that work. I feel like it has really impacted my own thinking around habits. Can you tell our listeners, what do you define as a habit?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, the technical definition of a habit is a behavior that has been repeated enough times to be done more or less automatically. So something you can do pretty much without thinking. So common examples are like brushing your teeth or tying your shoes, or even some like personality traits or characteristics that we often don't even think about. Like, oh, I apologize before I ask a question, or whenever I laugh, I cover my mouth, or things like that. Or little just quirks of your daily routine, like you unplug the toaster after each use or something like that. So those kinds of things, you can start to see like, oh, even when I walk into a room that's dark, I habitually or automatically reach for exactly where the light switch is. So you can start to see that it's like a very fundamental way that you operate in the world, and that your brain kind of learns how to navigate the space around you. And, when you first move into a new house or a new apartment, you don't know where the light switches is, or you don't know which light switch turns on which light. And
Right.
So you're kind of thinking carefully about how to do that. But then after you've been there for a few months, you start just flipping the right thing on autopilot and you don't even think about it. And so I think that's just a little example of the role that habits play. They help you operate or move throughout the world in a more efficient, more automatic, more fluid way. And so that's the technical definition. And depending on what research you look at, about 40 to 50% of your behaviors each day are done like that, more or less on autopilot, more or less habitual.
Wow.
Which is already a pretty large portion, right? And like that's, almost half. But I think the true impact of your habits is even greater than that. And I say that for two reasons. So the first is we will often use the word habit to mean something that isn't technically habitual, but I like know what you mean when you say it. Like you might say like, I want to build the habit of writing every week, or I want to get in the habit of going to the gym 4 days a week or something like that.
Right.
Now, you're never writing, for example, is a very effortful process, right? You're never going to just sit down and like go on autopilot and write for 45 minutes the way that you would when you tie your shoes or something.
Right.
But I know what you mean when you say that. What you mean is I want to get in the routine of doing this consistently. And same way with exercise and many other things that we say we want to make a habit out of. So I think technically speaking, I would define those as practices or routines or rituals, things that you do on a consistent basis, but aren't necessarily on autopilot. But then this is where I come back to the 40 to 50% of behavior. The reason I think that habits influence even more than that, maybe, I don't, it's impossible to put an accurate number to it, but maybe it's 70 or 80 or even 90% of your behaviors are either habitual or influenced by your habits. And the reason I would say that is that it's often the first movement in a practice or a ritual that is automatic. So for example, I sit down at my computer each morning and I just open up Evernote pretty much on autopilot. Now that little action of sit down and open up the same program every time, that can be habitual. That can be pretty much automatic. But then the writing that follows for 45 minutes or an hour, well, that takes more careful thought. But same thing happens to me when I go to the gym. I go into the gym and I sit down and I do the same routine every time. I take out my lifting shoes and my knee sleeves. I put them on. I do 10 squats without the bar. I do 10 squats with the bar. And that's like my little warm-up routine. And that is pretty much automatic. Now, then I start to think carefully about what weight do I want to put on or how many sets and reps am I doing today and things like that.
Okay.
And so I think the ultimate punchline that I'm getting to here is that a habit is a behavior that's more or less automatic, but you can often use automatic behaviors to initiate the ritual or the practice or the effortful routine that you want to come afterward. So even if you can't make the whole thing a habit, you can often make the beginning a habit.
All right. I've been talking on the podcast a little bit with our listeners because I built a daily habit of getting to my yoga practice. But you're right in that it started with I was going to grab this one journal and then start journaling, and then that would lead into my yoga. Like I have this whole thing, and now it is a habit, I feel. I'm almost to 100 days, but it was not a habit at the beginning, and it took a long time. So then here's another example I'm struggling with is I want to get outside for 10 minutes a day, which doesn't sound very long, but it's very cold here and wintertime. So what would you say would be the habit then? You're saying the habit is not really the walking. It's something before that.
Right. It would probably be something like getting on your walking shoes or putting on your boots and your jacket or something like that. That's the thing to automate and make a habit. And it's almost like, I think about this with my workouts a lot. There's a moment, it's usually around like 5:15 or so. My wife will get home from work and either we'll change into our workout clothes and go to the gym, or we'll, order takeout and watch The Office or, hang out or whatever.
Right.
And whether or not we do the workout, really, even if it takes like an hour and a half to drive to the gym and do the whole workout and get back in the car and drive home, the whole thing is really determined by whether we change into our workout clothes or not. It's really that's the piece that needs to be made a habit. If we do that, then everything else is already kind of pre-decided. It's like, oh, well, we're going to get in the car and I'll get under the bar and like all that stuff will be done. And so I think the thing to focus on is to make the first action easy. And that's one reason why in the book I talk about this idea of the 2-minute rule, which is you take whatever habit you're trying to build and you scale it down to just something that takes 2 minutes or less. So do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat, or read 40 books a year becomes read one page, or walk outside for 10 minutes a day becomes lace up my boots. Like, it's the thing that takes less than 120 seconds that you can try to focus on making a habit. Like, just build that into your routine and automate that, and then trust that the next movement will follow naturally.
Okay. Do you think that a habit needs to happen at the same time every day? And does it need to be a daily thing?
Well, so the answer to both of those is it helps. It helps if it's done daily. It helps if it's done at the same time. But technically speaking, neither of them are like absolutes. So the first one is, does it need to be done at the same time? Well, really, the way to think about habits, time is just one element of context. And so habits are linked to a particular context. That's how you learn to do them again each time. So for example, think about the habit of tying your shoes. Now, you don't always put your shoe on at the same time. Sometimes you put them on before you go for a walk in the evening. Sometimes you put them on in the morning. Sometimes, you have to take them on when you walk into a church or somebody else's house or whatever it is, right? So there are different reasons that you would put your shoe on. But the context of looking down at your foot and seeing an untied shoe on it is very similar. Even if the shoe is slightly different, or you change the shoe strings, or it's a different type of, different floor underneath your foot or whatever. Like, the context is similar enough that your brain knows, oh, now it's time to go into that shoe tying habit. And so this is why, if you can hold as many elements of the context static as possible, it becomes easier to build a habit, which is why, sometimes I'll recommend environment changes. So let's say you want to build the habit of reading each night. Well, it can be kind of nice if you pick say you buy a new chair and you put it in the corner of your living room, and that becomes your reading chair. It's the only thing that happens in that chair. When you sit down in it, you open up a book and you read. Now, if you want to watch TV or do something else, you sit on the couch or you sit in a different chair or something like that. You don't mix the context. And this is one reason why people sometimes struggle to build a new habit, is that they're trying to build a new habit in their old environment, in their old context. So their brain already has a bunch of habits that are tied to that context, right? Like, if you come home and you watch TV for 2 hours each night on the couch, and then you're like, you know what, this year is going to be different. I'm going to start a reading habit. And you sit down on the couch. That's great. And you can do it if you remind yourself each time. But the default in that is your brain is like, oh, this is the couch where I watch TV each night. And so you kind of like find yourself being pulled to the remote to turn it on. And so that is partially a time thing. There's maybe it's the setting sun or the fact that it's around 6 or 7 p.m., but it's also the whole context of, I'm in the living room, I'm on the couch.
Okay.
And so time is one element of context that you can use to your advantage, and doing a habit at the same time can be a way of instilling that. But there are other elements to the process too.
Okay, so we could use location. This is interesting that you brought this up, because one of our listeners who was on the podcast, Matt Kowald, and he was talking about habits in terms of building a daily yoga habit. And he also built it while he was an athlete. I find that very interesting.
Mm.
He asked, what about when you're traveling and everything is out of place in terms of your environment? Then how do you hold on to those habits?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that people who travel a lot deal with all the time. So I think the thing to do, so in Atomic Habits, I talk about this strategy called habit stacking, which is where you take the new habit that you're trying to build and you stack it on top of something that is a reliable piece of the context, of something you can count on being there. And the recommendation that I use is to, so this tactic, I learned it from BJ Fogg, who's this professor at Stanford, and he refers to it as anchoring, because you anchor or stack your new habit on top of an old one. So you take a habit that you're already doing, like for example, let's say meditation. Let's say you want to build a meditation habit. So your habit stack could be, okay, I know that I make a cup of coffee every morning. So after I make my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate for 60 seconds. That's my habit stack. After I do this thing that I always do, I'll do the new thing. Now, in the context or in the situation of travel, the hard part is things are always changing. You're checking in and out of new hotels. You don't know where the gym is. You aren't quite sure, like, where do I eat healthy? You don't know what the restaurants are in the area. Like, there's just a lot of things that you're unsure of. But there are a few pieces of that process that tend to hold and be fairly consistent. And so I think what you want to do is build some habit stacks around the things you can count on. So for example, after I get to the gate at the airport, I will do, 3 minutes of stretching or something like that. And so the habit stack becomes this thing that I always do. I always get to the gate at the airport. Now that becomes the cue to do this healthy habit.
Okay.
Or after I check in at the hotel, I will immediately look up the closest gym in the area. So now you know where you can go work out. Or after I put my luggage on the luggage rack in the room, I will immediately do 10 push-ups, or I will immediately look up, healthy options for lunch and dinner tomorrow or something like that. And it can be whatever is, most useful for you, but you're trying to use those reliable cues from the travel experience to spark and remember and initiate the healthy habits that take a little bit of extra effort that you wouldn't have to do at home, but kind of prime you and set you up for success while you're on the road.
Okay. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. And I feel like we can also take pieces of that when we're trying to build a new habit. Do you see a huge spike on your website or in the book sales right around the new year?
Yeah, January is always an interesting month. It tends to be the highest traffic month, and book sales have shot up during that month as well. So yeah, it's interesting. I think people are naturally motivated by the idea of a fresh start.
Yeah.
They like the idea that we can start anew and we can, like this time it could be different. Hope is high, which I think is great. I don't think there's anything magical about the new year. There's no reason to wait on a change. If it's November, there's no reason to be like, oh, I'll wait till January.
Right.
If you want to change, you can change now. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with using the momentum or the energy of a new year to get started on something.
So then what happens with the individual who feels like, and I have felt this many times at the new year, I've done some research and tried to change this, but often that is the time where I will feel like I want to do everything. Like I want to do this reading thing, plus I want to sleep earlier, plus I want to do this. Do you have any advice around that?
Yeah, this is something I've dealt with personally as well. Especially if you're ambitious, it's easy to get overwhelmed with all the things that you want to do and all the changes you like to make, or you just get really motivated for like a week and you do 6 different things, and then you realize, oh, this is way too many balls to keep in the air, and it's like hard to stick to that. So I have a couple recommendations. The first one is to focus on what's called a keystone habit. And a keystone habit tends to be the habit that like kind of naturally pulls the rest of your life in line. It sort of has this like ripple effect on other areas. So a very common keystone habit, and the one that's my keystone habit, is exercise. I know that I tend to lift about 4 days a week. And if I get those workouts in, then a lot of other good things happen. So, of course I get the benefits of working out, but I also tend to sleep better because I'm tired from the workout, which means I wake up the next day and I have better energy and feel better. I tend to eat better. I guess I could eat poorly and try to work it off at the gym or something. But for whatever reason, when I'm working out, my thought is, oh, I don't want to waste it. And so I tend to eat healthier. And then I also have this like post-workout high for about an hour or so where I can really focused and can get good work done and, focus on the things that matter. Now, at no point was I trying to build better sleep habits or nutrition habits or focus or energy habits. All that stuff kind of came as a natural side effect of just focusing on the one keystone thing. Am I getting in the gym? Other keystone habits that you'll hear people talk about, creatives will often talk about a daily walk is crucial for them. If they can get outside and walk for 15 minutes, then all the rest of their ideas kind of flow smoothly, or they feel like they're in a more creative state. Performers like athletes or comedians will often talk about visualization being a big part for them. Before they step out on the stage or before they walk onto the court, they visualize how the game is going to go or how the performance is going to go. CEOs and managers will often talk about meditation being a keystone habit. If they can get like 10 minutes of meditation in the morning, then they feel like they can manage the problems of the day much easier. And then the last one, which I think is kind of interesting that often comes up, is budgeting and paying off debt. When people start to pay their debt off, they'll often find themselves like they'll feel motivated to work out or perform other habits as well.
Oh, really?
And so what I usually recommend to people is, nobody can tell you exactly what it's going to be for you, but you probably already have a decent idea. You probably, if I asked you, like, what do you do on days when things go well? What do your good days look like? What tends to be a part of that? You'll probably have 2 or 3 things that you feel like, this might be my keystone habit. So I would say, if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling like there's a lot of things that we want to do, start by, let's focus on the areas that kind of naturally ripple out into the rest of your life. Let's try to figure out what 1 or 2 of those keystone habits are. Focus on that, build that, automate that for the first month. And then once you kind of have this natural momentum going in, multiple areas, and you're just focusing on that one thing, then you can start to think about, okay, maybe I want to add another one or something.
Okay, that's really good. Now, when you talk about that, I think immediately of I was doing my daily yoga, and then I decided to add in the walk outside, or just even time outside, or shoveling snow. It just had to be 10 minutes outside. And I missed. I felt like I failed. So I missed 2 days of being outside, and it almost knocked my daily yoga. Do you have anything about like failing, kind of falling away from?
Yeah, this happens a lot. So what I started to notice, because a lot of times I'm very interested in habits and how they work, but I'm also interested in like high performance and what are people at like elite levels doing that's different than what everybody else is doing. And what you find is those people make mistakes just like everybody else. But the thing that's different is they get back on track very quickly. They really, it's almost never the first mistake that ruins you. It's like this spiral of repeated mistakes that follows from that, right? You like let a single miss turn into 2 and then 3 and then 4. And then before you know it, you're like building a new habit of not doing it rather than the one of actually doing it. So the little mantra that I like to keep in mind is never miss twice. And this is particularly helpful for things that you can kind of get all or nothing with, like diet habits. For whatever reason, diet habits are very all or nothing. People pick a diet and they do it for like 6 days. And then, their friends want to go to happy hour or they binge eat a pizza or something. And they're like, I knew I was going to blow this. Why bother? And my thing is, all right, well, I wish I hadn't binge ate that pizza, or I wish I hadn't gone out to happy hour or whatever, but never miss twice. So let me make sure that the next meal is a healthy one. Or when I was writing my articles, I would write a new article every Monday and Thursday. I did that for the first 3 years that I was writing on jamesclear.com. And if I missed on Thursday, well, that kind of stinks. I wish I hadn't missed, but never missed twice. So let me make sure that something is published on Monday. Even if it's short, even if it's not great, I just need to like start the streak again. And if you can embrace that philosophy or that mindset, then you get to the end of the year and you realize, well, these occasional misses are just blips on the radar. They don't really mean anything. But that's only true if you can never miss twice. So it's really more about pouring your energy into getting back on track than it is about pouring your energy into being perfect. In a sense, even if you missed all the time, but you never missed twice, you would at least do it half the time, right? You would do it, then you would miss, then you'd be like, oh, never missed twice. Then you do it, and then you would miss. And so even that for a lot of people, like you pick a new diet. A lot of the time we think about it, oh, you have to eat this way all the time. But if you ate healthier 50% of the days, that would still be a big win. So I think that philosophy is kind of my go-to strategy for getting back on track when you fail.
That's really helpful. Also, the streak thing, my kids understand this because they're on Snapchat. So they have this weird streak thing with all their friends. And like, I can't break my streak. So I was doing yoga the other day and I was trying to do it near the kitchen because I'd gotten up late and it wasn't my ideal. And I was like, I just have to fit this in just a little bit. And the kids were like, she's trying not to break her streak. So then they understand. I've heard you talk about that as well. And I like how you brought in the perfectionism here, that's probably what gets me. Like when I said,
this is why I have it right next to me here. I have this habit journal that I created. We just came out with it a couple of weeks ago. And it's basically a dot grid notebook, but at the back, it has this section of habit trackers. And so you can see I've been tracking my habits throughout the month and like marking them off or shading the cells in each time. So you could just do it with like a regular calendar. You could, each time you do your yoga or do your habit, you put an X on that day or whatever. But what I've realized is that if you have to be perfect when you do it, it becomes a real challenge because you want to pick habits that you can stick to even on the bad days. So what I've realized is that habits that I have on this tracker that require more effort, like for example, I have a lifting coach that I work with, and I have to upload my workouts to this software portal. And that's a very all or nothing thing. And unfortunately, it's kind of a slow process. So it's going to take me 15 or 20 minutes to like get it out of my workout journal and get it onto the software or whatever. And so log workout is a habit that I have on there, or a task that I have on there. And I don't do it very often because it's kind of big and it's kind of a pain.
Right.
But then right beneath it, I have another habit, which is my reading habit, which is read one page. And I have almost never missed the whole month on that. And it's because it's so easy. I feel like I never have an excuse to not read one page,
Right.
Like, and so my point here is that your example of doing the yoga near the kitchen and it wasn't your ideal setup and so on, you were still able to reduce the scope of the habit and find a way to stick to it, even if it wasn't the perfect iteration of that habit, right? Even if it wasn't the ideal way you would lay it out, you gave yourself permission to show up in a small way. And in the long run, I actually feel like those days are the more important days because even if they don't, like reading one page isn't going to make me a genius, or doing one push-up isn't going to transform your body, or doing yoga for 3 minutes isn't going to, radically transform your yoga practice. But it does cast a vote for being that kind of person, right? It casts a vote for being a reader, or being the type of person who doesn't miss workouts, or being the type of person who you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, the situation wasn't ideal. It wasn't my best day, but I still found a way to get this in. And that means that it's really important to me. And you may not even really say that to yourself consciously, but at least implicitly, you know that. And I think that in the long run, that really counts for a lot. It ends up reinforcing that I'm the type of person who does this. And it's one reason why you end up sticking with the habit for the long term.
That's really interesting. I like how you say casting a vote for it. And you have a quote, and I feel like I wrote it down about the casting a vote.
It's in chapter 2. It's about the whole concept of identity-based habits and this idea that like every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you want to become.
Right.
And I like to think about habits, especially small habits, as being like that, right? They're one of the reasons that they matter is they provide evidence of who you are. So you start to learn about yourself through your behavior, through your habits. Like if you study biology every Tuesday night for 20 minutes, after a few nights or a few weeks, you start to think, I guess I'm studious, right? Because like I keep showing up and doing this. Or if you go to church every Sunday for 20 years, you turn around and you're like, I guess I'm religious. I'm going here all the time, right? Like it's the behavior is the thing that casts a vote for the identity. And that's true for almost anything. And so, like if you go to soccer practice and you kick a ball around, you don't think, I'm a soccer player on the first day. But if you do it every week for like 6 months or 10 months or a year, or at some point you cross this invisible threshold and you're like, I guess being a soccer player is part of my identity.
Right.
And the way that I think about that is by casting votes, by building up that kind of little mountain of evidence of this is the kind of person I am. And at some point you get enough evidence that you have something to actually root the belief in, right? You have something to be like, yeah, this is true about me. And the reason that I like to phrase it that way or explain it that way is that it's a little bit different than what you often hear people say, which is like fake it till you make it.
Right.
Because fake it till you make it is asking you to believe something about yourself without having evidence for it. It's saying like, just think of yourself as a soccer player, even though you haven't gone to soccer practice or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with it necessarily. There's nothing really wrong with like trying to be confident about a new thing you could be, or trying to, talk yourself up or whatever. But we have a word for beliefs that don't have evidence. We call it delusion, right? Like at some point your brain doesn't like this like mismatch between what you're saying you are and what your behavior actually is. And so I think the more powerful way, the more robust way to change your self-confidence, your self-image, your beliefs about yourself, and ultimately reinforce those habits is to let the behavior lead the way rather than the belief. It's like I think it's the best lever that we have for changing how we look at ourselves is start with a very small habit, a very small iteration, reading one page, doing one push-up, meditating for 1 minute, And if you keep doing that and keep casting those votes, at some point you turn around and you see yourself as a reader or a meditator or someone who doesn't miss workouts or so on.
So this brings to mind some of the struggle that yoga teachers that I work one-on-one with are dealing with, and I have definitely felt. There is a real desire in yoga teachers to help people and to be there for people, to share yoga. They're really passionate about it. And maybe we don't always view it as a profession the way a dentist would, or the way an accountant would, or even a mechanic or a carpenter. We don't always form that strong business sense. So for myself, I can say that doing the accounting side of my business is not my strong suit. So how could I build a habit? Or say for a yoga teacher who doesn't feel very comfortable marketing. Those are the two that I hear, like accounting, the bookwork side of things, profit planning, and then marketing. Can we build habits there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think to a certain degree, at least, this could be seen as an identity piece as well. Like perhaps the standard yoga teacher, and I don't know because I'm not one, but I'm just kind of building off of what you said here. Perhaps they look at themselves more as a teacher or a healer or someone like that, right? Rather than looking at themselves as a marketer or a business person or a manager or, and those are all identities too, right? And so similar to what we just talked about with proving to yourself that you're a meditator by meditating 1 minute, or proving to yourself that you're a reader by reading one page, the same thing can be true for proving the business portion of your identity, right? Like proving to yourself that you are strong with the numbers in your business, that you're strong financially, that you have like a strong accounting portion of your identity, or however you want to phrase it. You could start just by, so I do this every Friday, I do a weekly review. And all I do is I calculate how much revenue came in over the last week. And then I calculate like what percentage of that should be put into savings for taxes, and what percentage of that should go to expenses, and what percentage should go to profit. And it takes me less than 10 minutes, but that's, and you don't even have to do the whole thing at first. I find that this is true, and this is definitely not just a yoga teacher thing. I've talked about this with many entrepreneurs. Just knowing your numbers gives you confidence in your ability to run the business side of it. Most people, you'd be surprised how many, or maybe you wouldn't, how many entrepreneurs don't know their numbers, don't know how much revenue came in last week, or don't know how much they paid out in expenses last week. And so I'm not even saying that you have to start by doing anything with that information. I'm saying just knowing it, just calculating it. That's a good first step to casting a vote for that kind of business side of your identity.
Right. So really start small, because even when you say that, I think, oh my gosh, would that mean that I have to open QuickBooks? When would I do that? Like, would I then have to balance things out and reconcile something there?
Mm-hmm.
I start to, I feel like fighting against it already.
Mine is just, so I use Chase as my business checking account, but I just open up Chase and I open up a Google sheet, a spreadsheet, and then I just add up all the credits that came in from the last week. And that just gives me a little revenue, right? But like that doesn't, and there are other steps that can follow that once you get into because at some point the ultimate goal of this, right, similar to how the ultimate goal of working out is to see a change in your body or feel healthier or feel like your joints are moving better or whatever. The ultimate goal of checking these numbers is to try to make sure the business has a healthy profit, or make sure you can pay your expenses and bills on time, or, there are ultimate outcomes, right? But you don't have to get to that at first, just like you don't have to see a change in your body the very first day you show up at yoga.
Right.
So, you're really just looking to like take that first step and cast that first vote for, this is something that's important to me, and this is something I'm going to, make part of my identity, and really get handled too. Like I think at like a very base level, a lot of people feel uncomfortable in the gym at the first time, or uncomfortable when they're doing yoga for the first time, or any kind of physical practice, because they're uncertain. They feel like they're not in control, right? Like, will people judge me here? Do I know how to move my body in this way? Am I sure how to, do it? Will I feel stable? Is this going to be uncomfortable? There's a lot of uncertainty associated with that process. And so because there is uncertainty, there's also a little bit of fear, because you don't know how it's going to play out. And so people avoid it, right? They just say, I'm not going to go to the gym, or I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to try this new style of yoga or whatever. And you can be on this uncertainty can manifest itself in like an infinite number of ways, right? For some people, it's physical, but you can be the most ripped yoga teacher in the world and feel very uncertain about the numbers in your business or about how things are going. And so you can take that and it becomes, I'm just not going to look at the books because it stresses me out or I feel anxious about it. I'm not sure if I'll be able to pay the bills, or I'm not sure how much money is coming in, or I don't know what to calculate or what this looks like. And just like somebody learning how to move for the first time, you take it in baby steps, right? And gradually your mobility increases as you keep showing up to classes. And the same thing is true with your business. Like gradually your fluidity and flexibility and knowledge of the business increases with practice as well.
Right. Oh, I really like that analogy. I'm sure our yoga teachers will like that as well. And I'm thinking, okay, that will be my one thing. Do you find that you often focus on goals that are really more personal? Like you've been talking about working out or walking or writing. Do you think that most people are looking for something that's more personal life than business life in terms of their habits?
It really depends on who I'm talking to. So sometimes I speak to like financial companies or banks or traders or venture capitalists, things like that. And those folks tend to be very financially minded. And so they're very much thinking about, how do I make better decisions? How do I be more productive at work? How do I optimize the 9 to 5 portion of my day? So that like those, it depends on the person. Those folks are very focused on work habits. And the same is true for, I speak to a lot of like sales teams or sales managers. Again, they're very focused on, how can we get the most out of my sales staff and things like that. And then I speak to another portion, which you fall into, which tend to be, and maybe this is just because I'm, an athlete and really enjoy training and so on, who tend to be much more health focused. And those naturally lead to, whether it's power lifters or yogis or Olympic lifting or CrossFit, tend to be very focused on personal wellness and personal habits, and maybe a little bit less so on the work side. And so I think, this is a very broad brush, so I don't know that everybody falls into that. But generally speaking, yeah, perhaps people have a preference of they tend to think more about their work habits or they tend to think more about their personal habits. But at the end of the day, we all have habits that are, anybody's habit is personal to them, right? Whether it's at work or whether it's at home, it's something that you're doing. And so I think ultimately it's an individual pursuit, whether it's in the context of work or in the context of your family and family life. And understanding how your habits work and what you can do to shape them can be useful in both contexts.
Do you have any tips for someone who is a procrastinator? Maybe we all are to some extent.
Sure. So the 2-minute rule that I mentioned earlier, I think is that's one good way to start. Is often you procrastinate because the pain in your mind, the pain of doing the full task seems greater than the pain of not doing anything, right? So the pain of writing the 12-page report, that sounds like a lot. And the pain of watching Netflix right now is very low. So I'd rather just do that, right? And then put it off. But then eventually, as you get closer to the deadline, the pain of not doing it is increasing because there's this, now there becomes a greater threat of, I do have to get this report done at some time. I don't want to be reprimanded at work or get a bad grade at school or whatever. And so at some point, maybe it's, the night before at 10 p.m., you cross this threshold and it's like the pain of not doing it now is greater than the pain of doing it. Now the fear of the consequence is enough to drive you to take action. And if you can lower the pain of doing it, lower the pain of taking action by not thinking about the whole 12-page report, but just say, all you got to do is write the first paragraph. That's it. Or write one sentence. Well, now the pain of writing one sentence is not that much different than the pain of having to go downstairs and walk over to the TV and turn on Netflix. And so you try to change the calculus a little bit in your mind and focus just on that first movement. And what I find is that often, if I can just get myself to get started, I know somewhere implicitly that I do actually want to do it. I do actually want to get this report done.
Right.
It'd be nice if I could get it done early. That would be great. Then I wouldn't have to worry about it. And I would have some extra time to do what I want, watch Netflix or whatever. And so once you get started, it's often easier to actually be in the middle of the work than it is to be at the start of the work. Once you get going, it's like, oh, okay, this feels good to be making progress on this and get it done. So that's one thing that you can do. The second thing that you can do that I think is particularly helpful is use what I talk about in the book as a commitment device. And a commitment device is a strategy that you can use to make it, you basically lock in your future action. So let me give you an example. So let's say that you are talking to yourself and you're saying, all right, tomorrow's going to be the day. I'm going to wake up early and I'm going to go for a run. Like I'm going to actually do this and start to build this running habit. So I'll get up at 6 and I'll go for a run. And then 6 a.m. rolls around and your bed is warm and it's cold outside. And you're kind of like, well, I guess I'll just hit snooze instead. Right. Yeah. So you procrastinate on this like waking up early idea. And there are a lot of people who feel that way or want to do something like that. But what you could do is use a commitment device where, let's say now you rewind the clock and it's the day before and you text a friend and you say, hey, can we meet at the park at 6:30 and go for a run? Well, now you have a running partner. So 6 a.m. rolls around and your bed's still warm and it's still cold outside. But now it means something different because if you don't get up, you're a jerk because you leave your friend at the park all alone.
Right.
And so now all of a sudden it's more attractive to do the habit and less attractive to procrastinate. And little tricks like that kind of change the equation in your mind so that it doesn't feel as good to procrastinate anymore. It feels better to take action because there's like a cost associated with the behavior. And there are a bunch of ways to do that. I have a long list of them in the book, but so for example, another commitment device that I use sometimes is if I'm trying to lose weight or cut down on calories, I will ask, and we're at a restaurant, I'll ask the waiter or waitress to box up half the meal before they bring it out to me. So I'm kind of like pre-deciding how much I'm going to eat. If I let them just bring it out and I was like, oh, I'll just eat half, like that would never work.
Right.
And one that I used while I was writing the book. So I realized I was spending too much time on social media. And I needed to be spending more time writing. And so what we started to do was every Monday, my assistant would log me out of Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter and reset all the passwords. And then I would write all week. And then on Friday, she would send me the passwords. I would log in and use it over the weekend. And then on Monday, we'd do it all over again. And I was essentially like forcing my hand, right? It was now less attractive to procrastinate because I'd have to, I don't know, I guess I could log in and reset the passwords, but then she would know that I did that. And then, just like, and so, if you don't have an assistant or something, you can do it with your family, do it with a friend, do it with, whatever. Like there are a ton of options here. The point is just that you're trying to find ways that make procrastination less attractive, make it less enjoyable to do that. And so I think between scaling the behavior down and using that 2-minute rule idea and employing some commitment devices, you can often get around procrastination or at least make it less likely that you'll fall into it.
Right. Is there a way to add a reward? So sometimes I tell myself, hey, if you get up out of bed right now, you can listen to a podcast all the way down to your yoga mat before you practice. But then sometimes I think, am I building this new, like I'm getting wrapped up in the podcast and it might play a little bit longer. Like, am I building a habit that might actually turn into something not helpful?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think, first of all, just the answer to your question about the strategy, yeah, that's super effective. I think it's great. A lot of the time, there's kind of this valley of death that is associated with habits where you're starting the habit, but then like it takes a while for the rewards to accumulate, like what's the reward of going to the gym for like 2 weeks? Like in the beginning, not really much, your body hasn't really changed. You're probably sore. You keep putting in all this effort and, you don't have much to show for it. Like it's not until 3 months or 6 months or a year later that you actually start to really reap those long-term rewards of working out. And so there's kind of this like valley in the beginning where it's like, why am I even really bothering? Like I'm putting all this effort in, but I don't see the outcome that I want.
Right.
And so for that period, it's really nice to have some kind of external reward, which psychologists call reinforcement, that reinforces your behavior and helps get you to show up. So whether that's I get to listen to a podcast on my way to the yoga mat, or if I work out, I get to, for every 5 workouts I do, I get to have a bubble bath or something like that. Right. It doesn't matter what it is, but something that kind of makes it feel like, yeah, this is enjoyable in the moment. Now, ultimately, what you're hoping to work toward is the habit itself is enjoyable, right? Like for me now, going to the gym feels like its own form of reward. I get out of my office, I get to move a little bit. It feels good to see a couple of my friends at the gym and move my body. And, like all of that is enjoyable in the moment, which is ultimately what you're looking for, but not I don't even know that it's bad that people don't feel that in the beginning. Like you kind of need to show up enough for it to feel like it's your territory, for it to feel like it's part of your life before you start to get some of those rewards. Now, the one caveat to add is what you mentioned, like, oh, am I giving myself a crutch now that I don't actually want in the future? And I think the key question to ask is, does this reward align with the long-term identity I'm trying to build? So if you're trying to build a habit of going to the gym, but then your reward is, well, every time I go to the gym, I get to have an ice cream cone afterward.
Right.
Well, now you're casting a vote for being a healthy person at the gym, and then you're casting a vote against that when you leave and go get an ice cream cone. So it's kind of like a wash. And so I think that's why I give the example of like the bubble bath, because that is a vote for taking care of your body, right? Which is also the same kind of thing that you're trying to reinforce when you go to the gym. Or if your habit is, I try to save $100 every month for retirement or something like that. Well, you could say every time I do this, I get to reward myself by buying a new item of clothing. But like that kind of runs against the idea of being a saver rather than a spender.
Right.
So you could reward yourself by saying every month that I hit my saving goal, I get to have one Saturday free where I get to go for a walk in the woods and do what I want, which is rewarding yourself with free time, which is kind of ultimately what you're hoping for when you save for retirement, right? This like, how can I have more freedom? And so you're really just trying to find things that align with that long-term identity. And I think if you do that, it's great to have those kind of reinforcers in the short and medium term that help keep you on track while you're waiting for those long-term rewards to accumulate.
Okay, that's really helpful because you're right. If I was listening to the podcast while I was doing yoga, I would not feel like I'm doing a mindful care of myself practice. So you're right. One last little thing, maybe it's a huge thing, is what do you see now in terms of you talked about social media. I went 48 hours without my phone, which felt liberating. And I do feel a little bit like I'm voting now when I have my phone. So do you see anything helping us to focus in, with our phones, with our email, with our notifications, our social media?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's something I've had to deal with a lot myself. And I think this is just going to be an ongoing conversation for all of us. It's not going to be something that just, vanishes or something. First, just like to set the context, I guess, or kind of understand the situation. New technologies are coming out all the time, and current technologies are always upgrading and improving. And because of the system of capitalism, because of how things are set up, companies are incentivized to build products that are used more, because that's how a company makes money. And I don't think that there's anything necessarily like evil about that, or that there's anybody who like actually has it out for you or something at those companies. There's not somebody sitting there thinking like, how can I take all of their time and attention?
Right.
But it's sort of a misaligned incentive in a sense, right? Like you and I want to be able to spend our days in a conscious, thoughtful way, working on things that are important to us, spending our time and attention on things that matter. And sometimes we use technology to do that because it's very helpful. But all of those technology products that we use, their incentive is, how can we get you to use this more? And so there's this mismatch, because we only want to use it for, the things that are most useful and matter the most, but they want us to use it all the time. And there are, dozens or hundreds, or in some cases, if the company is really big, like Facebook or something like that, thousands of engineers who are working on that problem. And so because of that, the default, the kind of the natural gravity of technology is that it's pulling you in to use it more and more. And so to fight back against that, I think you need to view it as kind of your responsibility as the individual consumer to design a space or design habits that allow you to use technology in the way that serves you, rather than one that kind of sucks you in or pulls you in by default. So I think there are a couple ways you can do this. One way is to kind of fight fire with fire and use a piece of software to mitigate another piece of software. So there are, things like Freedom, for example, which is a website blocker where you can set up a recurring block. For example, like I could log in and say, all right, I'm spending too much time on ESPN and too much time on Facebook. So I'm going to use Freedom to block those websites from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. each day. And so now I can't even get to them if I wanted to. So that kind of like helps automate the willpower a little bit. Mm-hmm. Now, I find that sometimes going cold turkey like that, or the completely, like your phone is off and it's in a lockbox for 24 hours or something, in a weird way, that's actually easier than using it just a little bit.
Yes.
And so for that, to use it in some moderated fashion, I found that I almost always have to have some kind of software. So for example, there is an extension for the Chrome web browser, Chrome extension that is called Facebook Newsfeed Eradicator.
Yes,
And
I have it on mine.
So it lets you log into Facebook, right? But then it just blocks the whole newsfeed. So you don't see articles or posts or updates or whatever. You can go to your friend's profile and you can post things, but you just aren't going to see that stuff in the newsfeed. So that's helpful. There's another one called Distraction-Free YouTube. And that allows you to watch a YouTube video, but it blocks all of the suggested videos in the sidebar. So you're less likely to kind of fall into, this spiral of clicks where you're just watching a bunch of them after each other. So solutions like that can help moderate the use a little bit while still giving you access. Like sometimes you need to watch a YouTube video for a project you're working on or something, but you just don't want to spend 2 hours on there. The other thing that I found helpful, though, and this one's probably been a bigger one. I already mentioned the little solution that I devised with my assistant where we logged me out and reset the passwords. Like that was kind of one way around it. That was like, all right, I can use social media on the weekends, but not during the week.
Right.
But the other one that I've started to do that I found very helpful is I leave my phone in another room until lunch each day. And it's really nice to wake up and respond and work on my agenda for the first few hours before I start responding to everybody else's agenda or what's in my inbox or things like that.
Right.
And it's not the whole day. It's only 2 or 3 or 4 hours, depending on the day. But it is really nice to have that chunk of time. And, if somebody calls in those 3 hours, I just call them back when I get it back. It's very rare that you have some kind of emergency that needs such a rapid response.
Right.
So little solutions like that, that's a physical one where the phone is actually in a different place. And then the other ones are software solutions. But those are little things that I'm doing to try to mitigate the pull of technology.
Those are great tools. Thank you for that. So if our listeners want to order your book or order the journal or check out your website, what website do they go to?
Yeah, sure. So you can check out my work and get links to the books and everything at jamesclear.com. You can just click on articles and they're organized by topic if you want to poke around and see what's interesting to you. Or you can click on books and you can find a link to the book and the journal there. And then if you want to go straight to the book, it's called Atomic Habits, and you can find that at atomichabits.com.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much for that work. Is there any habit right now that you're struggling with or you're trying to add in or you?
Well, I have one that I'm succeeding with and one I'm struggling with. So the one that I'm succeeding with is I spent a lot of last year writing, naturally, since I was finishing the book. And so now I want to spend more of this year reading and kind of getting back on track with that. So reading one page has gone really well. So that's been my new one. And I've read a lot more than that on some days, but that's kind of my standard baseline. The one that I'm struggling with is logging the workout, which I mentioned to you previously. It's just like, I don't know. I've done it like 4 times in the last month. I almost never do it. Another one that I had struggled with in recent months, but then have started to get back on track with now is being in bed before 11 p.m. That one really helps me a lot if I can, especially if I'm training heavy. It's just really nice to have an extra hour of sleep. So I've done much better with that one recently. And I think what I'm realizing is that's largely a function of travel. The more that I'm traveling or on the road for work,
Oh, yeah.
it's for me to do that. And the more I'm at home, the easier it is to get that dialed in. So anyway, I'm living and learning through all this as well. But yeah, those are some of the ones I'm working on right now.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Wow, Connected Yoga teachers, how was that? I want to hear your key takeaways. I would love to hear from you in our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group or on the show notes page. To find both of those, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com. What do you feel like? What is one piece of this that you can take and implement in your own life, in your own business, for your own yoga practice? One thing that is really sticking out for me is this idea of casting a vote for who we are as a person through the actions that we do. So I'm thinking about two things for my own life: how I look at my own accounting and finances in my business, and how I show up and practice yoga. And when I did the recording with James, this was hard to re-listen to because I had built up this daily yoga practice to such a great degree. And when I listened back, I had kind of dropped off my yoga practice for a few weeks. And so it was hard to hear. And so I dug deep and thought, how can I show up? And actually re-listening to this episode helped me to get back on track. I'm day 3 now of my yoga practice. And so what I'm noticing is that the votes that I am casting, the actions that I am doing, help to fuel the person I would like to be, if that makes sense. Okay, connected yoga teachers, this is a lot to think on. And before I sign off, I want to say a huge thank you to our team over here. Samantha, Suzanne, Crunch, and Cindy, all of you make my life so much better. The work that you do and the heart that you put into it is really inspiring. Thank you also, dear listener, dear yoga teachers who are out there in the world doing so much and maybe not hearing all of the thank yous. Actually, it's not a maybe, it's a for sure thing. Some of your students walk out of class in a bit of a fog or just feeling like, oh, that was great, off I go. And I know that they're not all saying what an impact it's making on their world. So I want to say thank you to you. It is time for me to sign off and get out into the garden a little bit, actually. So I want to know, what will you be doing to stay connected to yourself, to your yoga practice maybe, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?